So I'll begin. I mean, it's more of a conversation than a lecture. So feel free to intervene wherever you want. If you want any clarification question, if you have any disagreement, if you have any other issue, let's continue it that way. First, to begin with, I'm coming from a practitioner's point of view, not narrowly academics point of view, because I spent last 30 years of my life working with civil society organizations at different level, from the grassroots level organizations to national and international NGOs. And then with UNDP for 14 years, I was managing the small grants program. So I was supporting various civil society organizations. So first is theoretically, they always, ask you, what do you mean by civil society? So one of the definitions that I liked the most was that civil society is achievement of public goals through private means. So whoever is using private means could be your knowledge, your money, your time, your attention, your expertise to achieve public goals. Something it doesn't directly satisfy your needs, but other people in the community, outside the community, it's the other, working with them. So that is civil society. And you need to have some context of why civil society has become so important. I think its recent history goes back to 1992, when in Rio de Janeiro, uh, an Earth Summit was held by UN. All the UN agencies were there, and they realized two things which were initially expressed there. One is that we have become a global community, so we need to set up global standards also relating to poverty alleviation, relating to development, relating to climate change, relating to sustainability of the planet. We need to set global standards, global goals, global indicators, and so that people the world around they work together to achieve those goals. But the second and most important realization was that these global goals cannot be achieved without engaging people at local level, without engaging communities at local level, without working with local activists, community leaders, local specialists. So that is very important. So one was global goals, the other was local action. I actually managed a program of UNDP, which was right, which came out of that conference, which was called LIFE, Local Initiative Facility for Urban Environment. It was hosted by UNDP, and its tagline or slogan was thinking globally, acting locally. So that is where civil society organization and local action and local organizations come in. At a different level, it is also important because for achieving these global goals, there has been some failure at the market level. If market was working so efficiently that it could meet the needs of all the people, people at the margin, people at low income level, people belonging to low caste, people belonging to different genders, people belonging to different ethnicities, races, if it was taking care of all different identities in the same way, then there would have been no need for much civil society action. So one of the reasons was market failure. The market is there, it is supposed to provide fair wages, but it still doesn't provide enough so that people can educate their young ones. They can take, they have their healthcare needs taken care of. They can have shelter. We are living at a time when we have historically unprecedented abundance. Human history has never seen so much abundance, so much productivity, so much creativity with technology. But we don't have enough to feed our half the planet, half of the population. They can't even have 2 meals a day. So if they can't have healthcare taken off, if they don't have shelter, if they don't have food, if a large number of people don't have access to clean drinking water, then what kind of development we're talking of? So not only it is market failure, but in many ways it is also public policy failures also. In the Western world, we have welfare states mostly, and welfare state is supposed to take care of the needs of those people who, for some reason or the other, they have not been able to meet their needs within the system, who have been left behind for whatever reason, and who need to be supported, or who temporarily they go through difficult circumstances and they cannot meet their needs. So for that reason, public policy, welfare states in the West, and welfare policies in the rest of the world also did not succeed. Right after the end of the World War II, from 1945 up to now, uh, an aid industry was established where bilateral donors, multilateral donors like UN agencies, the World Bank, and bilateral donors, Western governments, they have been providing financial assistance to the countries which have low level of human development indicator or gender equity indicator. They've been receiving all this assistance, financial assistance, technical assistance, guidance, but still, majority of the world was far behind even the lowest benchmarks for human development. So that showed that there was something missing in the public policy also. That is why many people with experience in the development uh, profession, they realize that we need to mobilize and activate the local communities. So that is the second reason that civil society is the center stage now. So this belongs to the context. But civil society is a very diverse word. Uh, there are so many categories. There are voluntary organizations who give time, money, expertise, everything because psychologically or spiritually or in terms of their values, it satisfies some of their inner needs. They think it is something very important to them. They don't seek any grant funding from anywhere. They don't seek any external assistance. Mostly they're local action groups who identify some local need. I mobilize resources locally, and then they work for the fulfillment of those needs. So there are local action groups, community-based organizations. Then there, in around 1970s or 80s, a transition took place from voluntary civil society organizations. The world started moving to professional organizations because the challenge was so big and the intervention needed was on such a large scale that many development agencies considered that we need to intervene on a large scale. And to intervene on a large scale, then you need to attract people who have the expertise, who are willing to work, but who cannot work voluntarily. They are good professionals. They at least need to be paid decently. And then you need to have a dependable system of functioning because voluntary work you can enter in anytime, you can leave anytime. You are not answerable to anyone. So if you want to ensure continuity, if you want to provide professional assistance, if you want to create large scale systems, then you need professional organizations which work more or less like non-profit contractors. Although they don't ask for salaries or expenses like private sector, they're willing to work for much less, but still they ask to be paid as professionals. And for that, large scale international organizations like Oxfam, Plan, WaterAid, ActionAid, they go and mobilize resources internationally from international donors and bilateral donors and philanthropists. and then set up their program. Their approach is different from the voluntary organization. One major difference is that local organizations mostly they respond to some very important local need. And then people who are benefiting from the program, who are identifying the needs, who are working for the fulfillment of those needs, who are providing resources, who are bringing in expertise, they're all the same. There's no distinction. In the case of professional organizations, wherever they go, they have to decide what to do and where to do it and what should be the scale of their work. So usually the way they work is they don't go and ask every community about their needs. It becomes too expensive for them or too much time consuming. So what they do is they go with a program in hand. It is more of a supply driven. You might be working on health, you might be working on food, you might be working on women's uh, specific health needs or mother and children health needs. You might be working on provision of clean drinking water, micro infrastructure, whatever, or microcredit. So in all these cases, there is specialization, there is professionalism, and then you go with the predetermined agenda. It is also called top-down approach. Although they try to engage communities, but still what they're doing is they go with an agenda and then they take it to scale. So if they have professionally designed a way of working and they work on a large scale, then they can also minimize their operational costs because the program is already designed, professionals are already there, they pick a geographic area and work on that. So it has its own strengths and weaknesses, its positives and negatives. And third is, and this in my language we call it template approach, that you go there with a template, with a cookie cutter. So you use the same mold to create same kind of thing everywhere. And the third one is what we call process-based approach. Organizations which employ professionals to work with local communities, but they always ask the communities what do they want and how they want it to be done. And I will be telling you the stories of how it is done. That is the purpose today, to give you some insights from the field about what is the field-based or people-centered or bottom-up approach for community development. So these are three major organizations. So when you go to a community, what should we do? The first thing. There is a person, Ernesto Ciroli. After this class, you can go to the net and check this guy, Ernesto Ciroli. ERNEST and SIRROLLI, I think. Ernesto Ciroli. He, in one sentence, he summed up very sharp and witty way. He said, if you want to help, shut up and listen. So this is the first thing you need to do. Ask the people, what do they want? So, but we go there as very well-educated people, years of education and school and university, and we think, how the hell do they know better than us? So I'm coming to that. I will give you some example. Can you guys see my slide on the screen? Is it visible or not?
I can see your first one.
Yeah, first one. Yeah.
Yeah, first one I can see it.
Okay. So I think everyone can see. So I will now start moving. So this is based on the lessons of a guy who worked for more than half a century in South Asia, where you have the biggest concentration of the poor in the world. Very remarkable man. And I had the opportunity to work with him and learn from him. And this is what he taught us. Very interesting insight. I hope it should be working. No? Okay. Can you see the second slide? Yeah. So he said when you contact a community, they are aware of their problems and they also have ideas of solutions. That is very important. Many a time, there is a confusing uh, idea circulating. You go to many good NGOs, they say that we want to create awareness. We need money to create awareness among the people. So I belong to the school where they say that if you don't need to make a hungry person awareness of his or her hunger. If you are hungry, you will know you are hungry. No one needs to make you aware of that. So when you go to the people, they are aware of their problems, whether they're poor, whether they're ill, whether they're hungry, they're shelterless. They are aware of the problem, but they also have some ideas of the solutions also. They're surviving because they confronted a problem and then they designed a solution. Maybe solution is not good enough, not well developed, not the best solution that could be with the professional technical guidance, but the solution is there. So you first need to ask them, and then I will explain to you, I'll give you an example of how it is done, of a very interesting program. And he said, when you talk to people about their solutions, there are two types of solutions. Many a time when development professionals they go to the community, they ask people, what is your problem? They will tell them their problem. But the real challenge arises when you work for solution of the problem and you ask them about their solution and they will tell you a solution which you think is not practical. It cannot be implemented. So you will say, what is the use of consulting this community? These people have no sense. We have come to the dead end. But Dr. Akhtar Hamid Khan had a very interesting insight. He made the distinction between the dreams and possible within means. He said, when you go to the people and you ask them about the solution they propose for their problem, there will be two types of solutions, dreams and possible within means. So it is important for you to know the distinction and help people understand that distinction also. For example, in one area, which was on the periphery of Pakistan's metropolitan city, Karachi, he went to the people who lived in villages and who had large tracts of barren land, which could be a source of income for them, but nothing had happened. They did not receive any help from the market or the government, and they used to work as menial workers in the town. So he said, why don't you start cultivating in these fields? And they said, there's no water. So he said, how should we solve the problem of water? They said, we need to bring a canal here. So if you are talking of canal, it would have cost tens of millions of rupees in Pakistani currency. And this is the dream. Government doesn't have that money in their budget. They can't raise it themselves. So that is the dream that you dig a canal and bring water to their fields. So then you have to start looking for things possible within the means. So what is possible within the means? And when you start asking them to be part of the solutions also, one reason they are reluctant is they say we can't afford it. Solution is so expensive. So the challenge of development professional is to come up with a solution which is possible within their means. So what he proposed, he said in these fields you don't sow crops which need big amounts of water like wheat or cotton or sugarcane or others, big water consuming crops. He said, why don't you grow fruit here, like apple and apple orchard or other fruit, which require much smaller quantity of water, much less frequently, very small indeed. So they said, yes, we can grow apple trees over here. And how much water do you need? They needed to make a contract with a donkey cart owner who will come every week and irrigate the roots of all those saplings. And they could all afford it. It was pittance. So that is the difference between the dreams and things which are possible within the means. So the challenge of a community development professional is when they go and work with the people to find the solutions which are possible within the means. And in 6 years, they had bumper crops and they were, well off, and their level of income had increased many times. So he said that solution within means reflects communities' resource endowment. They have the land and they have the workforce, men and women who are ready to work, and they have some savings. Second most important insight which you need to know, especially if you're going to work with a civil society organization, is that when you go and talk to the people and propose to them something, like here you are proposing growing apple trees, creating apple orchards in the lands. So many a time in the beginning, people will not, you will find many people who don't agree with you. And he had a very interesting insight. He said, if people don't agree with you, it means anarchy, not rejection. It doesn't mean that they're rejecting their views. It only means they're unsure if the idea you're proposing will work or not, if you can be trusted or not. And if something happens, if something goes wrong, how should they deal with this? So he said, if there's anarchy, don't get disheartened. What you need to do is you need to identify early adopters. From within the community, you will always find one or two people who can see, who share their vision with you, who can see the worth of your ideas, who are willing to work with you, who are even ready to take some risk. So he said, you work with them, and working with them, you test the idea, you show the success, and you demonstrate to the whole community that this idea is worthy of being used. So he said, once you do that, you succeed in showing the success on a small scale, then there will be snowball effect, because people don't want to take risk, but once something succeeds, they don't want to stay behind. That is the psyche. So and working on small scale is also important because you make the mistakes are also limited to a small scale. You don't create a bad image on a large scale. You don't lose trust and confidence of the people on large scale. You test it on a small scale. If there are any losses, they're also very small. They can be easily covered. You can improve your solutions, work on them again. And once you are really successful, people will always be following with you. And this is a very, very important lesson. You should not underestimate this, because some of very successful programs all over the world, they started with one household, one community, one village, or one settlement. And the most famous example in this regard is Grameen Bank, pioneer of the microcredit program. And Professor Yunus, who started this program, who was professor of economics at that time, I think at Dhaka University in Bangladesh, he started with one village, his own village. I see there's something, maybe something, one asked something. For the two types of solutions, but why do we need to dream if it is unattainable, when the community is eventually going to choose a solution? It means possible. No, let me clarify again. When you go to the community, you will hear various solutions from the people. And some of the solutions fall in the category of dreams, which cannot be achieved with the available means. And there are other solutions which can be achieved with available means. So when you go, you give full freedom to the people to express their views and come up with their ideas. It is when you have so many different ideas, you can make a good choice, because large number of options increases the range of your choices and increases your level of freedom. So that's the thing being said, that when you go to the people, go with an open mind and an open heart. Don't pre-decide everything. Leave it open. Then look at the solutions. First, identify the solution which is possible within means. And once that have been found, then you look for the people who are willing to be early adopters, who share your vision, who are willing to take risk. And then you test your idea. Once it is tested, refined, and it is successful, then you will see people, no one willing to stay behind, and then they want to join, and then the scale will increase. That is how microcredit program, which was started by Grameen Bank. Grameen means village in Bengali. So it was village bank. So once it succeeded in a few households, then a village, then it was like a wildfire all over Bangladesh and then all over the world. This thing spread. And similarly, in 1993, 2003, another program was started in Pakistan, which is called Intest-Free Microfinance. They went one step ahead of Grameen Bank and started providing credit to the poor without any interest charges. It also started with one household. There was one donor, one woman who contributed 10,000 rupees for the first credit, and there was one woman who received that credit and showed that she used it successfully, and then the money started pouring in. Now their program is multi-million dollars worth, all raised from the people. I think there is another. Okay. So that is the methodology. So that you ask the people. Now, how do you consult people? That is again a general principle. And I gave you the example of this area on the periphery of Karachi, which is called Dildar Got. But this method of consulting the people, there's a terminology used. I am basing my things on some of very interesting and successful programs which were designed and implemented in Pakistan. And they were the brainchild of this guy, Akhtar Hamid Khan. So the second program, which was very, very successful, was Aguakan Rural Support Program, uh, which was started in 1982 in northern areas of Pakistan, in 1,000 villages spread across Himalayas, Hindu Kush, and Karakoram Mountains, world's highest mountain ranges, and most inaccessible villages, highly treacherous terrain. But our Rural Support Program, which started functioning there, it succeeded in doubling the income of every household in that area in 10 years. And this happened because they always consulted the community wherever they went. Every village where they went, they would consult the community. So I will explain this methodology in more detail. How do you ask people? So methodology they used, they call it diagnostic dialogue. Diagnostic dialogue consists of 3 steps. It consists of 3 dialogue. And this is done by their social organizer. But let me go back here 1 step before I go to diagnostic dialogue. I talked to you first diversity of civil society organizations, contractors, volunteers, professionals. But within there are 2 layers within the civil society organization, and it is very important to know the distinction between those 2 layers. If we don't know that, we don't have realistic expectations from them. One is the community organization, which consists of local interest groups. It could be farmers, women, local entrepreneurs, landless laborers, whosoever, water users. So this is called local action group or community-based organization or local interest group. But their success or failure to a large extent depends on the support organization, which is above the community organization, but which consists of people who have professional expertise, who have technical knowledge. And because of that technical knowledge and expertise, they can provide technical guidance or social guidance to the community. How to make better use of the resources they already have, how to stretch their resources, how to generate more income, how to generate more benefits by using the resources they already have. What technical intervention is needed? What design should that intervention have? How much cost it should have? To what extent it can be made affordable? To what extent they need credit? To what extent they need grant funding from the government or the donors? So that is the job of the professionals. And that tier of professionals is called support organization. So you have a community organization and you have a support organization. So Aguakan Rural Support Program was a support organization. They had people with managerial experience, financial management. They had people who had experience of consulting with the community, conducting a dialogue, people having expertise of monitoring and evaluation, people having expertise of horticulture, livestock, farming, range management, climate issues, and constructing micro physical infrastructure, water channels, link roads, bridges, all these things. So this group is called support organization. If government is not functioning efficiently, if private sector is not meeting the needs, then the civil society organization needs to bring all that expertise to the people. And their solutions become affordable because this overhead cost, the salaries of these professionals and the resources needed to bring them, they are not included as price of the services. So whatever solutions they make, they provide this as a grant, as a support from the support organization to the community. So the actual solution costs much less. So AKRSP, our Rural Support Program, was a support organization. And the way they held the community dialogue and the way they organize the communities, it's very, very interesting. I want to share that experience with you. And depending on the time, then I might share some other examples with you. So what they did was, as a part of this diagnostic dialogue, Kaju, you have to give me a cue 5 minutes before the time ends. I think I didn't realize we 3:17. So in diagnostic dialogue, in the first dialogue, they went and they organized the people. And instead of taking some survey or filling out the survey form and collecting data or themselves deciding a benchmark of the poor, first question which arises in poverty alleviation is, who are the poor? So there are so many definitions of the poor, so many indicators. So you can just get bogged down into that. They made a very simple way through. They said, ask the people who are the poor. So they will go to a village, hold a dialogue, and ask 3 questions. Do you want to alleviate poverty? They say, yes. So do you consider yourself poor and you want to become a member of that poverty alleviation organization? You decide yourself. This is called the principle of self-selection. So if you're willing to do that, then you become part of the organization. The third thing is that when we leave, you together hold the meeting and decide one intervention which will alleviate poverty of the most of the households in the village. And we will come and help you achieve that goal. Implement that intervention, make a technical design for that. So they would do it in the first meeting, they will go away. In the second meeting, they will come and ask them what they want. Then they will put their technical team at work to come up with the feasibility. Third meeting, they will present that feasibility to the community organization. And the community organization, if they accepted that yes, this is what they want, then they say, okay, we'll give you grant funding for this to implement this. But it is not free. You have to meet 3 conditions if you want to benefit from us. One is you create an organization. It will be done for the whole community organization, not one household or one individual. Second, you will start regular savings. Even if you are poorest of the poor, you will save. In the beginning, people would say, we can't save. But this was to help them cross their psychological barrier that we are poor. We have nothing. And now you won't believe it, these communities have saved hundreds of millions of dollars, trickle from one house to the other. And the third was that you will acquire technical skills. If you do these 3 things, we will give you the grant, but we'll give you only one grant. For the next projects, you will do it as your own savings. You will use your saving as a collateral to the bank, and bank will give you the credit, and we will be co-signatory with you so that the bank trusts you and gives you. So that is how they started. And in 100,000 households, directly they benefited them and their income was doubled. And the most important thing was they said that when you create an organization, there will be no elections. You will elect people, pick people by consensus, so that when you have elections, it starts the fuse between 2 parties. One party is trying to show delivery, other they start pulling their leg. So they said there will be no elections. You will choose people by consensus. The entire community will be behind them and pick the person who you can grab by the collar if they don't use your resources properly and efficiently. So this is the way they went. And the second was, this was one part. The other was how to work with the government. We have too little time, so I will try to sum it up. Uh, so working with the community, you need diagnostic dialogue. Working with the government, he said, if you want to engage the government and you want to get government support for your work at community level, you have to work as a solicitor. Solicitor means you are not the judge and you are not the plaintiff. Plaintiff is the community, judge is also the community or the government from whom you're seeking funds. You are a solicitor, so you have to gather the data in the community. What are their needs? What is their existing physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, level of organization, how much savings they have, how this can be best met, what is the best technical option. And once you have done that work of a lawyer or a solicitor, then you take along the community, you give it to the community to go and negotiate with the government based on that solution. And then community can succeed in convincing the government and access resources from them. So on both sides, you consult, you collect evidence, you create the case, and you win people. So this is the way the professional, people-centered civil society organizations have worked in dealing with various issues. And it has a large range of things. They worked on the issue of shelter, health, education, income generation, and all other issues. So I think we have only 2 minutes left. So if there are any more questions, you can let me know. I have another PowerPoint presentation, but I will share it with Kazu and she can then post it on later on. So you can see that lesson also.
Thank you so much for thank you, Didi, so much for the very insightful lecture. And we haven't really talked about the participatory development, but I think your lecture, Didi, sort of grounded on your experience. And Didi, I think important to understand that the community, the true, the achievement of participatory bottom-up, approach, I think is really important. I see Jack raising hand. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, please.
Thanks very much, Professor. And thank you, Professor Bakir, for a great lecture. I have a question regarding what you mentioned earlier with regards to the snowball effect that comes from the strategy of early adopters. So what I was wondering is, when a proposal finds early adopters among the community and then produces a sort of snowball effect as the idea grows in popularity within the community, I'm wondering, how can the strategy be safely implemented with at least adequate consent from the community as a whole, rather than some of the leading members who become early adopters?
No, it happens in the community as a whole, but it happens in an incremental way, because all people are not they don't have the same vision, they don't have same level of understanding, and it should not be forced on them. I will give you another example very quickly before we finish. In one of the largest squatter settlements, or informal settlement as it is called in Pakistan, Orangi, Dr. Hamid Khan realized that one of the key causes of people falling below poverty line was the expenses incurred on treatment of the bread earning member of the family. If the bread earning member fell ill, sometimes it cost so much they had to sell the family silver for the treatment. So if that could be prevented, and then he found out that almost 90% of the diseases of the poor are waterborne diseases. Whether it was malaria, typhoid, gastroenteritis, whatever. And that was caused because the water table was contaminated, because there were open drains, there was no proper sewer system, and no clean drinking water was available. So sanitation was the key. So for 6 months, he talked to the people and he found out that sanitation can prevent poverty, falling below the poverty line. Then 6 months, he kept talking to the people that if you lay a sewage line in your lane, are you willing to pay for that? If you pay for that, we can give you technical guidance. And for 6 months, people kept saying to him that, why don't you lay the first line? He said, no, I will not do anything. If it is really important to you, because if you lay the sewage line, maybe you will pay one time 100 rupees. And it will save you 1,000 rupees per year on treatment of a single patient. And continuously, if you add up, it will come to tens of thousands. So after 6 months, first lane was laid. And eventually 7,000 lanes were laid by people on self-help basis, covering the entire informal settlement. So it happened in an incremental way, started with one lane, but then snowball was to 7,000 lanes. A parallel project was done in a professional way by professional directly. It could not go beyond 36 lanes because that engagement and motivation and involvement of the people was not there. So I hope that answers your question to some extent, but you will find the convincing answer when you go to the community yourself
It does.
and
Thank
see
you.
it happening. Yeah. Okay, Kazu, should we finish here?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have actually just one last
Sure, I'm available. It depends on your time.
Yeah, so I think it's really important, your lecture in terms of really grounded on your actual, experience in Pakistan and your long-standing engagement with local communities. And I think emerging critiques of civil society is that I think you already mentioned about different types of civil society organization. You talk about voluntary and professional forms. And I think one of the really important critiques, emerging critiques of civil society, I believe that it's kind of bringing, determined goals, determined sort of so-called solution without the understanding local context. And I think your lecture really spoke about that the problem, that's why I think you emphasize a people-centered, bottom-up, participatory and consultation basis. But what's your view of that the critiques that, that the many civil society actors, particularly from the West, not necessarily understanding local reality and lacks sort of long-term view, like you mentioned that, we shouldn't assume that local people accept. Actually, accept the hesitation doesn't mean rejection, right? But from the West, not necessarily understand that the dynamic. So can you share?
Yeah, I can give you an example to explain this. This is very interesting. For example, most of us, I think 99% of the educated people all over the world, you ask them how can poverty be reduced or removed, they will say open schools. Immediately, their first reaction is that people need education. Okay, this is important. I'm not rejecting that. But let me tell you, in northern areas of Pakistan, where AKRSP doubled the incomes of people, not a single village asked for a school. What did they ask for? They asked for water channels. Because big water streams were passing close to their villages, they could not bring that water to their uncultivated land to irrigate their lands. So by creating these hundreds of water channels, they doubled the land under irrigation in that area. So it automatically doubled the income of the entire area. So in the short term, the solution was different. If they had educated the people, it would not have created any income. It would have added to their burden to pay the fee. But interestingly, it started in 1982. And the general manager of that program one of the villages he went to was Shamshal, the most isolated mountain community. A shepherd boy who met him during his first visit is now general manager of Aguakan Rural Support Program in that area. Because when the income increases, people can afford to send their children to school. They can afford to have health. So education does increase income, but in the medium term or long term. In the short term, it doesn't increase any income. So that for outside it is very important to know that people who live there, they are survivors and they're very, very intelligent. They know what immediately benefits them. So you have to start there. Once that is done, then you go to the next phase. So that is important to understand.
Thank you. Thank you for the, I think it's a really interesting example to think about. We tend to think that education is the first key emphasis should be, but I think that the really that the Aguakan rural development program really sort of indicating the experience indicating that we have to listen to local community and
I will give you a quick other example. A friend of mine was a headmaster in a school in Pakistan, and he wanted to buy a cow, so he went to a farmer for a cow. He said, "How much do you ask?" He said, "I usually sell it for 5,000 rupees, but I will sell it to you for 7,000 rupees." He said, "Why?" He said, "You were teacher of two of my children, and they're both completely useless. There is one who did not receive an education. He is tending the farm. He is doing everything. He is the bread, earner of the family. The guys who got education from you, they're totally worthless. They're sitting on the court. They wanted to be treated like officials." So that is very important. The relevance of education also, if it is not functional education, if it doesn't help. So when we go there, if we have ideas, prefabricated ideas, they become an obstacle in our way. They have to be adapted. Yeah.
Arizo, would you like to ask question, Arizo?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Sorry, my computer's just malfunctioning right now, but
But I can hear you. Yeah, sure.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, just wondering about that example you gave about Pakistan and all the South Asian and sort of neighboring Central Asian countries. Like, I noticed that there's this cultural difference, but do you think that in the short term, obviously these smaller contributions would help, but in the long term, do you think that that will actually lead to development as a nation, even if we just implement these changes in these sort of on a smaller scale, considering how sometimes the governments of these countries can be corrupted or stand in the way of funding and all that? Like, what do you think is the extent of the government's participation in this phenomenon? Like, do you think that they stand in the way of long-term development?
I think one important lesson, Farah, is that the principle is the same, whether you are working with the community or you are working with the government. One is you have to find an insider who shares your vision, who agrees with your ideas, who wants to change. Second is you have to demonstrate the power of your idea by implementing it. And third is by that demonstration, you attract other people who are willing to support and you make a change. This is what happened actually in northern areas with the government people also. I am working on the field notes of Mr. Shoaib Sultan Khan, who was general manager, and in the beginning he was hounded by intelligence agencies. There were people in the government who tried to intimidate him, create blocks, hurdles in his way. The reason is that many in the government, they have the zero-sum mindset. Zero-sum mindset means that your gain is my loss. No, they don't understand that poor people can gain without incurring any loss on them. They have to see that. If a farmer's land from 2 canal become 4 canal or 4 pieces of land, it doesn't hurt a rich man. He will still remain rich. the poor person will gain more. So once they start seeing that, then within the government you find what happened in northern areas was that many of the elected councillors, once they saw the success and effectiveness of AKRSP, they allocated their own funds to them, which came from the government. And they also persuaded the government that the government funds should be channeled from them. So the point is, the most important point is that the way people respond to you the first time, you should not take that as face value. You should have some insight of how to interpret it. When they're disagreeing with you, they are not rejecting you. They just don't have complete faith in your idea and in you. Once they see you succeeding, many will be able to join, not all of them. There will still be people opposing you. You work the same way with the government, you work the same way with the community. I call it the art and science of linking with the other. So once you learn that, then you succeed in any field, whether it is business, government, politics, community work. That is the logic.
Thank you. Yeah. Professor, do we have time for just like a small add-on to that question?
Yeah.
Sure, please go ahead. Yeah.
So recently we've been studying the Asian tigers in our class, and it just, kind of hit home for me because obviously like in South Asia,
Where are you from?
Afghanistan.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, so I was just wondering, like, do you see a future if the government was to get involved and kind of bring our own approach to it or our own cultural approach? Because as you did mention, you touched on that a little bit, where education is not as helpful and sometimes our culture, our lifestyle might differ in how we develop. So do you think that in the future we could see a sort of stark change in development, just like East Asia and the Asian tigers? Or do you, like, what's your opinion on that?
I think Afghans are the most enterprising people in the world, as far as I know. I know they're very enterprising people. I mean, there's no denying the fact. The thing is, unfortunately, they were caught in this two bloody wars for 40 years. So it will take a toll on any country. But the thing is, if they're given space, of course, everywhere in the world, it's very simple. I went to a training in New York on entrepreneurship, and this guy said that a businessman who wanted to check if his grandson, who walked on the knees at that time, had inherited his genes. So he asked him, how much is 2 and 2 equal to? And his grandson said, are you buying or selling? So if you know that, then you know entrepreneurship. So people all over the world are very enterprising, especially the poor people. And if they're given the opportunity, they can make miracles, of course. But patience is needed everywhere. And actually, South Asian tigers, they demonstrated better than South Asia. For example, in Pakistan, we were spoiled by being flooded by foreign aid. So it discouraged good management, efficient use of resources. Our business community was getting subsidized loans and not being asked to pay back their, grace period was extended. So that is why. But at the same time, while public accounts show billions of dollars worth of loan in Pakistan account, more than that amount is deposited in safe havens outside Pakistan. So all these people who are showing in the books, who are showing losses of their enterprises, they're actually making profit outside. And that is happening because people don't have much say in the matter of government. But there again, the lesson we've learned is that people can get a foothold in the government, not by fighting, but by engaging, by finding insiders within the government, by demonstrating to them their capabilities, by winning people from within the government. They can do it much more effectively. So I think this is very relevant.
Thank you. That was a really good answer.
Yeah, you're welcome. So in the future, if you want to do anything in Afghanistan, do let me know. So,
I definitely will.
yeah, there is good work being done in Afghanistan. There's some very, very good work, even during these years. Some good work has been done in Afghanistan.
I mean, that's where my last question came into play, because I mean, there's a lot of, we can't say we don't have the resources, and we can't say we don't have people who want to help, but at the
Yes.
same time, there is this sort of governmental structure where there's like just so much corruption just seeping through that no
Yeah.
matter how much you help on a small scale, you know, the elites will always shut it down. So that is something that's very frustrating. But obviously, like you said, with patience, it always comes.
Corruption is happening because there was so much money unloaded in Afghanistan. And they knew that government is very ineffective outside Kabul. So where should they spend that money? They showed on papers that all this has been done and then pocketed that money. It was misunderstanding on the part of the donors themselves that money is not solution for this. Is in the end, I want every one of you to know that donors run into problems because they're trying to solve non-financial problems through financial means. So corruption is a non-financial problem. The problem is not that there's lack of money. The problem is that there's not proper distribution of responsibilities between the community, between the government, between the private sector, between the professionals, politicians, and people. So that has to be worked out. You cannot solve it through money. You can solve it with your head. You have to understand the local situation. You have to see what are the most appropriate solutions, and you have to engage everyone. So that was the source of corruption, but it will not stay there forever. As soon as the donors move away, I think things will come back to normal.
Right.
There's another a person may want. Loli, would you like
Sure.
to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, hi, really great.
Hi.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. Yeah, but anyways, I think I have a question about kind of you're talking about how a lot of these professional organizations kind of cropped up kind of in that same time. So they had the voluntary ones and then the professional ones. So when there are so many organizations though, you know, how effective is it really? Because you know, if there's so many people, I know probably wanting to create an organization for good, of being like, oh, like we want to address this and address this, but you know, is there, I guess, a saturation point for how many organizations, you know, then you'd have more of a diminishing returns rather than it actually being effective? Because, for example, like all the funds would just be diverted among so many different organizations, all kind of trying to do the same goals. So how do you kind of ensure that that's still effective and people aren't just, you know, doing an organization, thinking that's really effective and it's actually taking away from kind of maybe the efforts of something that could be better?
Yeah, too much, you know, resources always become a source of inefficiency and corruption. I will give you an example from my program. When I started running the small grants program in UNDP, you know, on my program steering committee, Akhtar Hamid Khan was a member, a very wise man. And I asked him that I am approached by many politicians, and how do we deal with this? You know, how do we deal with the misuse and corruption at the local level? And he had a very, very interesting insight. He said the amount of money you give to local organizations should be just enough to meet their needs. The amount should be so little that politicians should have no interest in that because they always have interest in big money. If you give a grant amount which is very small, which only barely meets the needs of the local community, politicians think there's nothing for them. It is too much hassle. So only community can benefit from that. So that is one thing. The second is you try to fix the problems which are faced by the poor, which are of no interest to them. So that's very important. So, we used to give a very small amount as a grant money. So politicians thought it is not worth it, running after this money and, talking to people. And second is we did not give it the most important thing, which I told you right very early, that like in AKSB, they said, you have to meet certain conditions to qualify for our aid. It is reciprocal. So to build reciprocity, that you will create an organization, you will say regularly, you will elect office bearers by consensus. So if you build reciprocity in that, where community has to contribute and has to become a stakeholder, then you make it sure that the money will not be wasted. Then everything will have to be transparent. All the accounts will have to be presented to them. So these are the things that we can go to and find the details, but you have to work differently. In the case of contractors, what happens is, unfortunately, they come with prefabricated problems and their solutions and designs. They implement them. The moment the project ends, everything ends. And then they say, oh, people are not taking responsibility. People will not be with you in the end if they were not with you in the beginning. So if you want them to take it over right from the beginning, you have to ask them, what do you need? And how much are you willing to pay? If they're not willing to pay, it doesn't mean that they are poor. It means it is not high on their priority. Or your solution is not appropriate solution. Like I told you, Dr. Hamid Khan waited for 6 months before the first sewerage line was laid by the community, because he knew that this is the best solution for them, and they are trying to take the responsibility for this. And if that happens, they will become dependent forever. So he said, I will not do it unless you do it. I'm not carrying bags of money with me. So if you are working in the community, you should have patience, you should have insight. Gather insight, learn from the people, and then things will happen. But the most important thing is that modesty and humility is the most important element. You should be willing to start work on a very small scale rather than looking for the limelight and glamour immediately or anything. Most of these people work in a very inconspicuous and low profile way. Nobody knows about them. It takes years and years before their work's is known to the people. So you have to, and he always said, start from your home and start from your lane. If you want to start work, don't start it 500 miles away. It will immediately add to your overhead cost. Start where you are. And the people you want to engage, ask them to start at their home and lane level. We want to start at the federal capital, take over the whole country. That is not how it happens. It has to start there and then incrementally expand. And then at some time, like this Aguakan Rural Support Program, which started with dialogue with the first village community. Eventually, Shoaib Sultan Khan, I think 1990s or early 2000, he was invited to UN General Assembly to speak to the heads of the states. But it took him almost 25 years to get there. So things do expand and go to scale, but they need to start at a very small scale.
One more question, sorry. Charlie, would you like to ask question?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me okay?
Sure, yeah, I can.
Okay, thank you for that great lecture. I heard you mention microloans, and that's one of my main fields of interest. And have you heard of the WeBank of China?
No.
Well, I guess then that I
but
can't
you
really
can tell me if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if you're curious. So
Yeah.
essentially, they're doing microloans to farmers in China. Of course, they're doing it in a way that to me seems predatory. You know, they're doing an interest model that's very small amount, but over a long time frame. And they're using like cloud computing, blockchain data, and stuff like that to create a risk profile for how much money they can give you. But it seems like it's just another way for banks to make money. It doesn't really seem like they're actually trying to help relieve poverty, even though their message is supposedly to bring funding to the farmers and to the people who are underserved in the communities of China in terms of like banking. So I'm just curious on your thoughts.
The thing is, there are so many different ways this can be done. I will, Kazu, if you remind me, I will share with you a Harvard Business School's case study on the interest-free microcredit program in Pakistan. As I told you, they don't charge any interest on the credit given to the poor. But secondly, their people, they prepare a business plan with every person, every borrower. It's a small amount. Mostly they're street vendors. But even giving money to them, they said, we'll sit with you and we'd like to work on the feasibility of your plan. And interesting thing is, they say that poverty is not only financial, it is social, it is spiritual, 4-dimensional poverty. It is social because these people are isolated. Their community bonds have fractured. So once you create credit groups, you bring them together. So you overcome the social poverty. Spiritual poverty is their sense of meaning is not there. So what they do is, and one of the most interesting they have done, which no other credit program has done, that they've converted borrowers into donors. Once they succeed in paying back their loan, they say, look, you have now been lucky, you have paid back all. Would you like to give back also to the people like you? And they started giving even small amount, 1 rupee in Pakistan. It's like 1 penny here. And it is turned to, like hundreds of millions of rupees by those people. So, they are maybe relating to their tradition, their culture, their political system. They have designed the program, but there are alternatives possible also. It depends, where you are from, what connection you have with the community. And this is, they have done things which are unimaginable. But this program is called Ahuat, which means fraternity or brotherhood or sisterhood. And they were given some funding by the government and telling them that in 6 months, you should double your outreach. They went to a foreign expert. He said it will take at least so many years. And the program Ahuat, this concept was made that at least you share everything that you have with at least one more person. This is called Sisterhood of Brotherhood, Wahat. Its origin is in Muslim history. When the people in Medina, they shared their property with the immigrants who came there, almost half and half. Half with them and half they gave to them. It is called Muakhat. So what they did was they said that every branch in our organization, they will take another branch as mentors and teach them. Within 3 months, they doubled the scale. So there's so much room for experimentation and difference of opinion and different ways of working. So, I am not that familiar with the Chinese, community culture and political culture. So I think because the government plays a very strong role over there, so perhaps, and also media monitoring, they're doing the social ranking also. So that's a different way of doing things, but it can be done in a very different way. in other parts of the world.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much for this engaging lecture. And it's already 3:55, so I have to complete the lecture
Yeah.
today. But thank you so much for your time
Thank you.
and engaging with
I
students.
see one more, Kazu. I think let me just quickly see if there is.
Oh, yeah, Thindu, do you have question?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry for going over the time, but Aguakan has like he's a billionaire philanthropist and he has ties in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So if say if there's no like no source of wealth and source of like no one willing to help in their like you said
If
their
there's no
land.
philanthropist, if there's no big money, what should you do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it the same process or do you recommend a different process if someone else has to come from outside?
I gave you the example of Ahuat, this Intest-Free Microfinance. This guy was a civil servant from a middle class family, no money. He started the first, he credit 10,000 rupees, which was given by another woman who shared his view that it should be done. There was no big philanthropist, there was no billionaire there. So our summary for this is, tagline is that anyone can make a difference. You don't even need to have technical knowledge. You just need to have a will that you want to do it. You will find people who will provide you technical expertise, people who will provide you money, people who will be willing to work with you. It's only your personal decision if you want to change the world. You have to change yourself. You have to take a decision. So the process is the same. You don't need to come with the money. If the money is already there, it makes your job easier. But even in the case of Aguakan, let me tell you, they have mobilized so much money from their donors, but every project, they first do it with their own money. The testing, of the idea, they do it with their own funding. And sometimes they commit big amounts of money for that. Test it on ground, and if it works, then they approach the donor who share their views and vision, and then ask for their support for expansion and scaling up.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
Can be done. Yeah, welcome. Okay, I think we have taken all the questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kazu.
Thank you so much for the, yes, and it's already almost 4 o'clock, so I have to end the lecture today. Thank you so much for your time and really engaging.
Welcome, everyone. There's one more, let me see, I hope.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jessica, would you like to ask a question? I just stopped the recording.
I think you're done. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then